Shalom and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to discuss how it is that Psalm 22 is messianic. Can Christians answer this? How is Psalm 22 messianic? And that's what I intend to show in this video, and it is intended to be a standalone video. So if you have seen my previous upload where there were some technical difficulties, you will see some clips and stuff repeated in this video, but I want you to stick around because there's extra commentary, there's extra sources. And I want you to stick around to the end because I've got a little treat for you. But without further ado, guys, let's get
Great
started.
question. Glad you asked. Hold on because it's about to get real scholarly up in here. So to kind of understand how this passage is messianic, you would need to understand a little bit of the history of the demonic forces, and you would understand Mount Hermon and the reason why Caesarea Philippi is mentioned in the New Testament with Yeshua and his disciples. Furthermore, to understand a little bit more about these Bulls of Bashan and things that are mentioned in Psalm 22 and how this is messianic, you would need to understand a little bit more about Psalm 68. So we're going to dive into that now. So in Psalm 22, you have the statement, right? Many bulls surround me. It says, strong bulls of Bashan encircle me. So what are those bulls? Who are they? And what does the Tanakh have to say about this? Okay, so we're going to check out Psalm 68, verse 15 through 18. Mount Bashan, majestic mountain, Mount Bashan, rugged mountain. Why gaze in envy, you rugged mountain, at the mountains where God chooses to reign? I want you to focus on that. Where the Lord himself will dwell forever. Okay? The chariots of God are tens of thousands and thousands of thousands. The Lord has come from Sinai into his sanctuary. When you ascended on high, you took many captives. You received gifts from people, even from the rebellious, that you, Lord God, might dwell there. Full stop. Let's think about this. We're going to head over to Ephesians 4. I want you to pay attention to this. There is one body and one spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. Right? Here it comes. But to each one of us, grace has been given as Christ appointed it. This is why it says, here's Psalm 68 being quoted, when he, who is the he, ascended on high, he took many captives and gave gifts to his people. What does he ascended mean, except that he also descended to the lower earthly regions? He who has descended is the very one who ascends higher than all the heavens in order to fill the whole universe. And then he goes on to say, so Christ himself gave apostles, etc., so on and so forth. Why in Psalm 68 is God himself speaking to this mountain? And by the way, this mountain is the mountain where the angels descended, right? The rebellious angels that descended. Notice what is happening here. God is staking his flag, right? This is my mountain, my territory. And why would he do that? So why is God using in Psalm 68 the same type of verbiage that is used in Psalm 82, where God is rising, right? This is like God is finally standing up to exert his authority. And if you're not familiar with the background of Psalm 82, God is judging amongst the unrighteous angels who control the 70 nations. And now I know this is not something that mainstream Judaism teaches, but we're going to get there. This is why they didn't understand. So we're back to the point where Christ literally is declaring war on these powers. As Christ makes the statement, on this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. And at this point, Christ gives over the keys to the heavens, right? Key to heaven. Whatever you bind here on earth will be bound in heaven. And he tells them clearly, do not tell anyone that I'm the Messiah. So anybody that says it wasn't plain, he told his people that it was plain. It was just at a certain point in time. So continuing in Ephesians 4, knowing that it is a quotation from Psalm 68, which if you continue to read, it says, our God is a God who saves. From the sovereign Lord comes escape from death, right? Okay, great. Surely God will crush the heads of his enemies, the hairy crowns of those who go on in their sins. Notice how God's enemies are seemingly represented by these demonic entities that are behind the people. Now, where else do we find this in the Hebrew Bible? Let's look. So here we are in Ezekiel 28. Notice what this says, okay? The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, take up a lament concerning the king of Tyre. The king of Tyre. This is a human. And say to him, this is what the sovereign Lord says. You, who's the you? King of Tyre. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the Garden of Eden. Every precious stone adorned you. Like, hold on. A human, a mere human in the Garden of Eden? All right, so now we're in Isaiah 14. We're talking to the king of Babylon. And now we're going to go here where it says, how you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to earth. You who were once laid low. You who once laid low the nations, You have said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly. That's important. On the utmost heights of Mount Zephon. So there's different ways to render the back half of that verse. But what I want you to note is God speaks to these mountains or these mountains of assembly or these humans as if they are some sort of divine figure that was there in the beginning. And it's at this point in the video, I'd like to point you to the late Michael Heiser's work. He's the one that made it most readily available to the average person. Please look into his work with regard to Mount Hermon. When quoting from Psalm 68, Paul asks a wonderful question. What does he ascended mean except that he also descended to the lower earthly regions? The only one that would have done that would have been Christ. And if you're mistaken, John 6:38, for I have come down from heaven not to do my will, but to do the will of him who sent me. This word will of him, which is the ratzon in the Hebrew language, please study that word out. So ask yourself, why did Yeshua transfigure on this very mountain where all of this is happening, right? That flag of declaration of war, and this is my territory. And why is it that it's all very relevant to the Mount Hermon example of the fallen angels? And why is it that in Psalm 22, you have this figure crying out about this, right? And these Bulls of Bashan, they surround me. And we know that this is related to those whom were around Yeshua when he was on the stake and he was dying, right? It was at this moment that the evil ones thought they won, right? We've put to death the salvation plan of God. But the problem is as Paul said, if they had known, right, fully known the totality of the plan, they would not have crucified Christ, because that's the very thing that was their demise, right? I mean, they wouldn't have done that. But see, God concealed these things. And this is why it is important to now go back and test these things. This is why it's important to see that these passages don't fit David. And you can't say that they're hyperbolic. You don't get to just say, no, it's hyperbolic about David. Well, then if it's hyperbolic about David, that's fine. Cool story, bro. But what if it's literal about Yeshua? You don't get to say that the hyperbolic language is about David, but the literal fulfillment with it being about Christ is wrong. Well, how do you know that these Bulls of Bashan, or the Bashan in general, is related to the leaders? Right here, it tells you in Ezekiel 39, where the Lord assembles, right, and he wins this war. So even further, you have in cognate languages that this Bashan means like a dragon or a snake, which is so funny because you have that all throughout history, like Ugaritic, Akkadian, things of that nature. And this is all things that scholarly people find, but if you're not so scholarly, you may not find this. Or if you don't really care about history and what people believed in the past, which unfortunately is very much modern day Judaism today. 1 Peter 5 tells us that the devil is like a lion seeking to destroy. Interesting, Psalm 22 mentions that. And some will say, Le David Mizmor is about David. It tells you, but there's passages in Psalms where it's Le David Mizmor, Mizmor Le David, and yet they don't say those are about David. So today we're going to do a recap video on Psalm 22 and the messianic hope found in the totality of the chapter. We're going to go verse by verse and kind of break it down. I will bring in some other Psalms, but I'll briefly mention those and hope that you go off to then study those passages elsewhere. But let's get started. It says, so my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? So far from my cries of anguish? Do you notice what their problem is? Their problem is, where's our hope? And what is the hope? You would need to ask, what is the hope that they're crying out for? I would submit to you, the hope is salvation. And not only salvation, but restoration, right? And that's why this passage is starting off to be messianic. So he says, my God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer. By night, but I find no rest. Notice it's about languishing. This time that we're in, there's just languish. So how can you save me if you're not listening? That's basically what he's saying, or what he feels like is happening. So then he says, yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the one Israel praises. So this person starts to remember, in spite of everything, in spite of all the evils in the world, because you see here, in you, our ancestors put their trust. They trusted you and you delivered them. To you, they cried out and were saved. In you, they trusted and were not put to shame. So here he's talking about the evils of the world, i.e. the rulers of the world, etc. And he realizes, while I don't feel like you're listening, you did save, I just need to be patient. Verse 6, but I am a worm and not a man, scorned by everyone, despised by the people. Now clearly, no matter who you believe this is about, it is not literal. The tola, or the worm, is not literal, right? And it goes on to say, all who see me mock, they hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord, they say. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. So as this person kind of speaks for all of humanity, you see, yet you brought me out of the womb. You made me trust in you, even at my mother's breast. From birth, I was cast on you. From my mother's womb, you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near and there is no one to help. One would kind of have to ask, what is the trouble that is near that there's no one to help, right? And this person clearly mentions in the very beginning, like, why have you forsaken me? And it seems as though all hope is lost, that no matter what humans do, no matter what this person does, it all seems futile. But nonetheless, God is still there. And so in what way, in what capacity is God still there, even though this person, or i.e. humans, struggle and go through the trials and tribulations of this world, which are often the demonic forces behind the people who are leaders, as we've already discussed in the first section of this video. I think it's very clear that this is a passage where, while one person is speaking, one person is writing, one person is speaking, but it seems to indicate that it's on behalf of humanity. However, there seems to be one individual that brings about the restoration that everybody, or all humanity, is looking for. Now, verse 12 is where things get interesting. Now, we know that David wrote the psalm, right? It says, Mizmor le David. And we see this reverse, le David Mizmor, sometimes in different passages. It just depends. But nonetheless, we know that David wrote the psalm. And we know that 2 Samuel tells us that on David's last breath, he uttered inspired words. So this is not unusual that David would speak, i.e. write down, on behalf of the person that would fulfill this. In fact, in 2 Samuel 23, David actually mentions the everlasting covenant, which we all know that is absolutely related to the Messiah. So I would say that David prophesied many times in the Psalms, and that only in today do we say, no, this passage is about David. Again, numerous passages that says something to the effect of Mizmor le David or le David Mizmor that people don't believe is about David. But very interestingly, all the passages that the New Testament says is about the Messiah, then all of a sudden they want to say, no, it's about David. So let's go on to verse 12. Many bulls surround me. Strong bulls of Bashan encircle me. Roaring lions that tear their prey open their mouths wide against me. I am poured out like water, and all of my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax. It is melted within me. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. Now here's where things get very interesting. Dogs surround me. A pack of evil villains encircle me. They pierce. Now this is a textual variant. We have all discussed this. We don't have to discuss that now. Depending on which translation you're reading from, whether you prefer the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Masoretic text, or the Septuagint, this is going to read differently. It's pierce, or like a lion, they're at my hands and feet. All of my bones are on display, which is why this has the little symbol there. So pay attention to those. Those are normally indicating a textual variant or another way of understanding the Hebrew. All my bones are on display. Yes, all my bones are on display. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. So I have my notes here to kind of keep me on point so I don't go too far, because I will bring in a ton of scriptures and overwhelm you. So verse 12 through where we're at right now. The evil ones mentioned in Psalm 68, 15 through 18, as I mentioned already in part 1. God speaks to the mountain, Bashan, i.e. Hermon, and says he will reign forever. So that we know that this is not really speaking of the giving of the Torah at Sinai, right? As it speaks prophetically into the future of the time of the author, right? So the author of Psalm 68 forward. So for the sake of argument here, we're going to revisit 2 verses from Psalm 68, 18 and 19, okay? And we're going to do that for a reason. And this is Chabad's website. So God's chariot is twice 10,000 times thousands of angels. The Lord was among them at Sinai in his holiness. You ascended on high, you took captives, you took gifts to be among men, and also rebellious ones for Yah God to dwell. Let's look at what Rashi says that means. Because some might say that Paul misinterpreted the verse, but I don't think Paul did. Let's look. And also rebellious ones for Yah God to dwell. Here's what Rashi says. Also you brought about that the Holy One, blessed be he, rested in the tabernacle of the Torah, and you took gifts from the celestial beings to give them to the sons of men. Also among a people who were rebellious and were rebelling against him and provoking him. Very briefly revisiting how Paul uses this verse, but each one of us, grace has been given as Christ apported it, right? This is why it says when he ascended on high, he took many captives and gave gifts to his people. Now, depending on how you render the last half of that verse, which seems to be the same way Rashi renders it, what does he ascended mean except that he also descended to the lower earthly regions? The very one that ascends is higher than all. So Christ himself gave the apostles, prophets, etc. So is it God receiving or God giving? Some would say that God took from the celestial beings to give to the earthly humans. And if God took something, how did he take it? And by whom did he take it? And Paul is saying he took it, i.e. took the power away from those who fell at Hermon and gave that to the people, which is kind of what Genesis 49:10 is indicating, that these leaders would be leaders until an appointed time. And then from 13 through 18, you seem to have a crucifixion being described by the hands of the nations, which are often described in the Old Testament as beasts or animals. And this is something that we covered in part 1. But not only that, the New Testament as well as the Talmud describes this. This being Gentiles likened unto animals. Then 19 through 30 seems to indicate we're going to proclaim what the Lord has done. But my question is, as verse 31 says, they will proclaim his righteousness. Notice his righteousness, right? Paul talks a lot about God's righteousness versus the righteousness of the law. Declaring to a people yet unborn, he has done it. But my question is, what has God done? And by whom did he do it with? Hope this helps. Hey, Shalom, Ken. You said, I disagree with your conclusions, but still, this is the best Christian apologetics I've encountered. That makes me so happy. Thank you so much. And listen, I've never claimed that I would be able to convince all people at all times of the existence of God or in general the existence of Yeshua as the Mashiach. Okay, I've never claimed that. But what I strive to do is to give an honest apologetic with regards to why the New Testament says what it says in conjunction with Torah, right? And I think that the Christian apologetic would do much better if it would utilize the Torah more. And unfortunately, it hasn't. And most Christians themselves don't understand the Torah, which is why there is a communication breakdown. So thank you for your intellectual conversations and your dialogues that I've had with you. It really means a lot. And it helps for everyone to see that it's not so cut and dry for a lot of people, that sometimes there is a need for a back and forth conversation, which is not based on ad hominem attacks and a genuine understanding for the other side. And so thank you so much. It means the world to me that you have recognized this. And it's nice because it's one thing for your followers who already agree with you to recognize something like this. Like, hey, this is like the best Christian apologetics I've heard. It's another thing for someone who's not convinced of Jesus to at least acknowledge, hey, this is a pretty good answer. And that's all that I strive to do. That's it. And I've, again, never said that I would convince everybody, but I just want to be true to the text and I just want to be true to my faith and give over an answer for the reason why I believe what I do. So thank you again for your dialogue. It really does mean a lot.